Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Maker's Bar. We are creating 1 million leaders. I am your host, Troy Goldenberg. Today, I'm here with Corey Walker. I'm very excited to get to know his story better. Corey, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Very excited again to hear your story. I know you're a Washington correspondent, and I assume you're in DC right now, yeah?
Correct.
Awesome. So, really, the way that I usually start these is, how do you get to where you're at? What's your story? So that can go from childhood to school to wherever. So wherever you want to pick that up, what is your story here, Corey?
Well, so I guess a very broad question. I would say that, I identify as, just being someone from Chicago. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. That's where I was raised, born, and had most of my formative years. I spent a good portion of my childhood at a boarding school in Southern Illinois. And so, not necessarily Southern Illinois, but like the southern suburbs of Chicago. And from there, I went on, to college. I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan, and that's where I attended school. I studied history. I would say that there I kind of became really interested in a lot of things in the world, but it's there I actually learned about first really about Israel, the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's there where I learned about how explosive this topic is, and it's there where I personally worked at Hillel, which is like the international kind of student organization for Jewish college kids, really. And I took a class on the Israel-Palestine conflict while I was there at the University of Michigan, which is actually one of the most popular history classes. It makes sense. I mean, the University of Michigan, from what I understand, is about 20% Jewish. And the state of Michigan, as you probably know, has America's largest Arab American population. So obviously it's a popular course, but it also provides for a lot of explosive, I think, discourse back and forth where people just have very, I would say, entrenched views on both ends and very strong views. And I think that it was really great for me to, have that experience. And I think as the years have gone on, obviously, Israel, Palestine, that whole discussion has become such a flashpoint, I think, within the media. It's been a flashpoint within just organizations that have nothing to do with Israel or Palestine. Just like, if it may be an environmental organization or an organization that focuses on abortion, right? But like they'll, say that, oh, we have these very strong views that Israel is X, Y, and Z, and they're doing this or that to the Palestinians. So it's very important to discuss this. I've been kind of glued, I think, to my own phone over the past year, just like following the updates of what's happening in the Middle East, as well as domestic politics and how that intersects with what's happening over in Israel and in Gaza. And so, yeah, that's kind of me from a 1,000-foot view. I would say that if a lot of people are interested in why I work for the Algemeiner, that just kind of like happened. I needed a job. I was a reporter. I actually worked at the Daily Caller in the DC bureau office, but they had last year layoffs. So I was unfortunately a casualty of those layoffs. And I was like doing a lot of freelance work for a while, and I wanted something full time. The Algemeiner was open, and they were happy to have me. And I was happy that I could write about something that intersected with my interests, because prior to this, I was writing about like I had a fellowship where I was writing about like broadband expansion throughout rural areas and stuff like that, which is important, but like dreadfully boring and also difficult to write about. It's highly technical, and so you have to learn a lot of highly technical terms. You have to watch a lot of Washington hearings and things that are hearings in DC, congressional hearings, of which they're talking about terminology that I do not know. I would get through like two sentences and have to Google stuff because I have no idea what they're talking about. So this is more of my speed, and this is where I am right now. This is what I do. Yeah.
Well,
If you have more
yeah, no, we'll get into it. So I think it's been great to have you as part of the discourse. And for those that don't know, the Algemeiner, it's a Jewish newspaper here in America. It's the fastest growing Jewish newspaper here in America. It does a lot of commentary on like Israel, the Middle East, and worldwide, like the Jewish, it's kind of Jewish events, Jewish communities. That's what the Algemeiner is for everyone who doesn't know. And the way that Corey came onto Maker's Bar here, just some background for everybody as well, is obviously on my own Twitter or X account, this is what I heavily look into and a lot of topics. I mean, if you're a fan of Maker's Bar and you've watched my episodes, you've noticed that I've had a lot of people like this on. And I think he's just been, Corey, you have been a fantastic voice of just reason. And just like throughout this all, and the way that you're able to tie in American politics as well, with what is happening abroad is just it's common sense, it's reasonable. I encourage everyone to follow you because you're a part of the discourse that is needed, and we need to uprise. We need to take these voices and give them as much of a stage as we possibly can. So that just for everyone's background here, I just wanted to add that. And as far as you on your views on recent events, particularly we're recording this on Sunday after the election, just so everybody knows. How do you see the events of the election and American politics playing out over in Israel and the Middle East right now? I guess we can really jump into the things that you're super knowledgeable about here.
Yeah. So how will it play out overseas? How will it impact the broader Israel-Palestine conflict? Yeah. So I think we're in for kind of like a shift, a policy shift per se. And I think that's because of the fact that I'll give Biden some credit. I do think he hasn't been like an anti-Israel,
Not at
hate
all.
monger.
Yeah.
He has helped Israel. He supplied Israel. He stood with Israel even when it came at political cost, even within his own party where people were bashing him and saying all these terrible things. But what I do think is beyond the material assistance he's given Israel, as you know, and I probably know, is that rhetoric also matters, right? Like it's not just like, oh, I'm giving Israel, the weapons that they request. It's also, are you going to stand with Israel even when the international community is bashing them and saying all these terrible things, right? Even when the UN is doing this, even when the Democratic Party, your own party, is doing this. And I think that's extremely difficult for anyone to do, right? And in Biden's case, it's like, on one hand, he'll say like, okay, I support Israel, but then on the other hand, you have Kamala Harris who went out there and said they can't go into Rafah, right? I read the maps. You can't, they have nowhere to go, blah, 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 stuff like that.
Which ended up, by the way, being one of like the most important things that the IDF did throughout this entire war was get into Rafah. In fact, the critique amongst Israel and Israelis, it's like, we should have gone in here first. This is where everything was operating from, and all the tunnels that went to Egypt, everything. So sorry, just to kind of interrupt you.
No, you're completely right. And I think that when you bash Israel, what that does is that gives more leverage to Hamas, Iran, their proxies, because they know that they can continue fighting until, America basically forces Israel to stop, right? They wanted to make Israel into an international pariah state by forcing them to continue to fight the war, by ramping up the amount of civilian casualties, by trying making this go as long as possible to ruin Israel's international reputation, hopefully getting them charged with genocide at the ICJ, right? That's basically what they wanted, right? And so I think that with Trump coming in, there's much less room for these terrorist groups to maneuver, essentially in regards to trying to like drag stuff out. You see what's happening over in like Qatar, where they literally in Qatar, they were straight up saying, they told Hamas, yeah, you're no longer welcome here. Like you have to go. And it's no coincidence, at least to me, that this happened directly after Trump won. They see the writing on the wall. They see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So they can't really play games with the United States anymore, hoping that they can just drag this on forever and ever and ever, because the Democratic Party has a lot more of a pro-Palestinian, I think, line of sympathy than the Republicans do. And that's not to say that we
Oh,
shouldn't be
absolutely.
sympathetic for Palestinians and their plight. We should. But my view is that they're going about it the wrong way, because the Palestinian problem is Hamas, right? It's the Iranian proxies that make their life miserable. Their problem is the fact that the Arab nations don't care about them and basically view them as pawns, right, in their quest to eventually delegitimize and destroy Israel.
Yeah, that for me, that's really the big thing, and that's
Yeah.
something like one of the things that I always find like I'm grateful for and just intrigued by, and I think it's just like a good I don't know what the right word here is. Thermometer might not be the right word, but like just a great sign of someone's own moral clarity and ability to think really is when outside party, because whenever I come to these views that you come to, it can be quickly dismissed as, oh, you're Jewish. And obviously I am Jewish and I have family in Israel. I have a friend who was killed in the 7th. Like, I admit my bias. But for me, it's like when I see someone that come to these conclusions of really that big one for me too is the people in the Middle East, the powers that be, see the Palestinians as pawns, and they use their lives as they're just so invaluable to them. Just all they're there for is to throw at Israel, to use the Palestinian people and culture like a club. And to me, it's so obvious, but it's always intriguing to me when someone like yourself comes into this discourse and just gets there instead of just super entrenched in kind of one side or the other. I think it's really like I don't want to define you without, you can define yourself, but like it seems to be the people that are like, if you had to choose a side, okay, I'm pro-Israel, but it's not necessarily anti-Palestinian. And it's the people that land there seem to be the only people in the entire discourse that can actually see this truth. Does that make sense?
Correct. Like, I think that it's possible to have a more nuanced perspective, but I think you also have to have a knowledge of the history and the geopolitics of the Middle East, and understanding that a lot of this, social justice language that they're flouting around is a bunch of BS. Like, are we supposed to believe that like these countries like Iran care about, settler colonialism and they care about oppression and the so-called apartheid and and genocide and blah, 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 blah. These are just buzzwords that they deploy because they know that they can emotionally manipulate and rile up American progressives, right? And the Democratic Party is, by and large. They don't do this over there, right? Like this whole like pity party that they try to throw over, that doesn't happen in the Middle East because it's viewed as pathetic over there. And over here, you get more or less brownie points, right? Which is why, if you've looked at over the course of the, if you look at over the course of the past, few months, they've been trying to compare the Palestinian plight, their situation, to Black Americans' plight, right? So like they'll try to map it on and say, we're Palestinians living in the West Bank is like being Black and living in Alabama in 1958 or something. Like they try to make those comparisons. They're wrong, but at the same time, those comparisons are very visceral and emotional because of our own American, tragedy in regards to our race relations. And they're also just easy to digest and understand because, like, because of our own history and the way we teach it in schools, we know how Black people were treated in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia in the 1950s and 60s. And if you can map that onto a Middle Eastern conflict, it gives, at least you would think, a sense of moral clarity to like, oh, I should be pro-Palestine because Palestinians are like the Black people of the Middle East. But that's not correct. It's just like it's emotional manipulation. And my opinion is not that I'm anti-Palestinian. I've been accused of being anti-Palestinian, and I'm not. My thing is that the Palestinian plight is one in which is tragic, but it is the result of a lot of, factors are not, you can't just like simplify and say it's Israel. Palestinians have been expelled from other countries within the Middle East for various reasons.
By the hundreds of thousands at this point.
By the hundreds of thousands. Jordan at one point controlled the West Bank. So like at a certain point, it's like the way they talk about this history is just like, the evil Jews were just oppressing the brown Muslims and, over there. And, and it's just ridiculous. And then also just like the arguments that people make that, Israel shouldn't prosecute this war because they're, radicalizing more people. And the only way that you get to peace is by essentially doing a bunch of stuff that makes Israel extremely unsafe.
Yeah, which is it's so just counterfactual and it's anti-story because like
it's just lazy, and it's also just a misunderstanding. Because if you first off, it's not a racial conflict at all. Like if you were to go over and you were to talk to Palestinians and Israelis, in many cases you can't tell the difference by looking at them because there's a whole lot of brown Israelis, but the majority are brown skin. And if you were to go to the Palestinian territories, a lot of them are so light that they would pass for just being white people in America. So like you can't put this down to like a so-called racial thing, in many cases, like there's a heavy religious component. It's a territorial dispute.
Absolutely.
These are two highly nationalistic people that have nationalist aspirations. And so I think that to make it as simple as like our own racial dynamics here, where like Black Americans were never seeking to have like our own state within the United States, there was like an experiment in Africa with Liberia, but that's like kind of a fringe thing. That's not like obviously the vast majority of Black people do not support that. Yeah. So like it's, I
didn't even know that.
This is a very different, unique thing.
It is very unique. And actually one of the things that does drive me crazy is like, I get it that this is your job. This is kind of a job, but like it's something I'm super interested in. I've studied it for years before I ever talked about it, before it was a job for me. But for most Americans, this is just like something you're not going to hear about unless maybe you take a class and study it in school. In that case, you could be getting two very different stories, depending on who you're learning from. Do you have any thoughts on why is it so explosive? Because you mentioned, you were learning about this in college at Michigan. And it's just a super explosive topic. But why do you think that is? That this topic in particular, thousands of miles away on the other side of the world, that 2% of Americans are Jewish and 1% to 2% of Americans are Arab, and a tiny percentage of that is Palestinian here in America. So how does it grab hold here in America as much as it does?
I mean, there's lots of writings on it, but I think ultimately, first off, even though you're correct that small portions of Americans are Jewish or Muslim, most Americans are Christian. And the Holy Land, including Israel and Jerusalem, is also important to Christians. And so, like, I think the fact that this is a conflict that involves, in some cases, all three Abrahamic religions having some skin in the game, like, it probably makes it more salient than, like, for example, what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen, which is tragic, but like no one cares. It's sad to say that, but, like, very few people actually care. So I think that's one thing. I think that there's also like a broader sort of kind of academic criticism of Western civilization that exists, in which there's a lot of, I think, disdain for Western societies, where people in the United States and also in Europe and Australia who live in these countries and benefit from these countries often basically hate these countries. And so they always talk about, wanting to decolonize stuff. They want to decolonize Canada. They want to decolonize the UK. They want to, Israel, because of where it's geopolitically situated and the fact that it's kind of surrounded by a lot of entities that want to destroy it, is probably the most vulnerable and the easiest to quote unquote decolonize, right? So they view this as kind of like a way to strike back at or delegitimize Western civilization in so-called Western countries. They view Israel as a Western outpost within the Middle East, right? And part of that is because of the fact that Jews who were in Europe at the time were some of the, I don't want to say masterminds, but they kind of spearheaded the Zionist movement. Yeah. And there is just a lot of like anti-Europe sentiment there too. Like I said, it's anti-Western, which is why they spin it into being like, oh, Jews are evil white European colonizers oppressing brown indigenous people. And so much of this is like trying to project our own history onto another country, like I said. But then there's the academic element of wanting to delegitimize Western civilization, and it goes deeper into that. If you dig into that, like, oh, we want to destroy capitalism, quote unquote capitalism, which
Yeah.
comes across as a little anti-Semitic, considering these are Jewish people, and it kind of gets into tropes about Jewish people having money and whatever. But I
That can
think that's a
also, at
large
times, that
part.
cuts the other way. I mean, today I agree with you that the capitalism is a huge thing, but at times throughout Jewish history and even Israeli history, so like when in 48, when they declared as a state, Egypt, when they declared war on Israel, they did it as they needed to stop the socialist communist. This is like in the declaration of war, the communist threat that Israel poses. So like it goes the other way too. And the kibbutz in Israel, like, so I have cousins that live on a kibbutz. They're very small communities, but it's socialist. Inside those communities, it is like socialism here, living, and like that doesn't get attached here. I think for the reasons you were stating, is that academia and being anti-Western, anti these certain things, it also just ignores so many realities on the ground. Like if they really want to attack them the other way around, they could, and I'm sure that would get attached. And in the future, when we're old or dead and 150 years down the line, everything's changed. Maybe they do get attacked for that. But sorry, I wanted to add that in there too. I keep interrupting you, but
No, go for it.
Go ahead and finish. Yeah, that was really it. I just thought that was interesting because they attack based on a certain narrative that you're portraying, and it's very true. It's super weird and super interesting. Were you doing? Sorry, I'm switching a bit. Were you doing any of this type of work at the Daily Caller, or is this brand new to you? Like, how interested were you before this?
Well, Daily Caller, I was more of a congressional person and also wrote a lot about culture issues. So I was there when October 7th happened. So I wrote a lot about the crazy stuff happening on college campuses. But I was not like the foreign policy correspondent. I wasn't focusing
Gotcha.
on much on the Middle East. If they needed me to write about it, I could, but like it wasn't my assigned topic. I would say that at the Daily Caller, I was, I was writing a lot about a bunch of crazy things. I was actually writing probably a third of my articles there have to be like on transgender issues. So I was writing a lot about that at the time because that was like really hot then and actually very hot now.
Yeah.
And at the Daily Caller, we were evaluated not based on how much we wrote, but particularly how many page views our stories got. So
okay.
Because of that, I was not, I mean, there's no incentive to write about Middle Eastern conflicts because of the fact that like it's kind of a niche topic that like most Americans don't care about foreign policy, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There wasn't, because of my job description and what I was expected to do, like there wasn't much incentive for me to talk about it. But what's interesting is that did have debates at the Daily Caller about Israel. Our chief foreign policy correspondent there was much more sympathetic to the Palestinians. So like we kind of got into a lot of heated back and forths about the conflict. He was more sympathetic to the Palestinian narrative, but like, it's an interesting thing. Like I would say that because of the fact that it's a heated issue, that's a foreign policy issue. Like I didn't write as much about it when I was there, but I write a lot more about it now since I'm obviously at the Algemeiner, which is a Jewish paper.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What were you like? Were you like super interested in these culture wars? Is that why you started writing? Like,
I think that going into it, I kind of like was snobbish about it. I kind of turned my nose at it, like, oh, the culture war. This is like a stupid thing that like, like you only care about if you're like stupid and like don't have enough intellect or you're not enlightened enough to care about other stuff. But I actually think that my tune kind of changed because when I started writing about it, you do research. It was like, oh, wow, this is kind of like messed up, some of the stuff that they're doing in regards to puberty blockers for minors and just some of the stuff that kids are being taught in school. So like it did kind of irk me a bit. And I actually did shift my tune on some of this stuff, and I did become more interested in it. Um, yeah, actually, during Pride Month of last year, I went to a trans event, and I actually tried to interview some people there about like basically puberty blockers for kids and transition therapies for kids. And they figured out I wrote for a conservative paper, and they basically cornered me and started screaming at me and yelling at me. And started saying a lot of racially charged comments, which is really interesting given the fact that it's like these are like far left people, but they, use racial rhetoric against me. But it's, yeah, that I do have an interest in it. But I also, I have more nuance on it than I think people who are like super partisan. So it's like I can think,
I absolutely concur with that. Like that's one of the big things that drew me towards your work. Like starting with literally your tweets, was the fact that you are nuanced. The fact that you can like say, hey, this isn't just black and white, and here's my thoughts, and it's complex, and you do just tend like there's a covert of people in this space, in this political country morality discourse, whatever you want to call it exactly, that are actually able to like to see common sense things happen. You're one of them. I'd like to think I'm one of them as well. But it is crazy that you can't, if you went to like some far right event, I'm sure the exact same thing would happen to you. And if they found out you were writing for whoever you were writing for,
yeah.
Like it's crazy.
I actually have a. I'm sorry, I want to interrupt.
No, please go.
I actually probably shouldn't reveal. I think people know what my political opinions are since who I write for and who I've written for. But on election day, I actually went to a watch party. That was a pro-Trump watch party. And I'm not saying I voted for Trump or anything like that, but like I went because I like to be in spaces that are countercultural, basically. And this is DC, which is like 99% Democrat. So like the pro-Trump bar was like really interesting because it was the only place in DC that you're gonna get a lot of Trump supporters. And the topic of Israel kind of came up, and there was some stranger who was actually, I'm not making this up, he was wearing a shirt that said Trump like on the top, and then the subscript was Kanye. So like Trump Kanye 2024. So I was thinking like, okay, I kind of have an idea what this guy's views are already, but I didn't say anything. But he told me, he said, the one bad thing about Trump is that he's pro-Israel, and that he thinks essentially that America should ditch Israel, and that he thinks that Israel is bad for the United States, and Israel is the reason why the whole Middle East hates America. I have to tell him, like, that's not really true. Even if it weren't for Israel, they'd hate us because we represent Western values, but he didn't believe that. But yeah, like there's a couple of people there who were like, they were pro-Trump, but they were anti-Israel. And I would assume since you're wearing a Kanye shirt, probably anti-Semitic, right? Like if you're, put those two things together, that it probably isn't a far stretch to believe he doesn't like Jews, or it's not, at least it's not a deal breaker, right? Yeah. And then interestingly enough, at that same rally, that same watch party rather, there were also people wearing like the Israeli flag, like draped over their shoulders, right? So a lot of like Jewish people were there, and they were wearing like the Israeli flag, and there were people there who had T-shirts on, I think, that represented the Tablet, the website, the magazine Tablet, that was just like another Jewish outlet. So I assume they worked there as well. And so, there's both sides, I think, are represented on the right too, where you have kind of the Nick Fuentes, kind of Candace Owens, anti-Semitic right, but then you also have the people who are Zionists and really believe that Trump will help defend Israel more than what Democrats can.
Yeah, well, I think that last part's undeniable. I think since he got elected, as we spoke about before, it's just crazy how much he does help that country. And it is interesting how there's an author called George Friedman. I want to say it's his name. I hope it's his name. He wrote a book called The Storm Before the Calm that I love. And he talks about how he actually said it was going to be 2028 when kind of it all came together. But there was going to be these uncomfortable new parties being formed right before our eyes. And they're going to have like these massive contradictions on certain things. This just being one of them. I'd
Mhm.
say, there's a anti-Israel part of the right. Now, Candace Owens
Mhm.
of the world. There's a pro-Zionist, pro-Israel part in the right. And then there's just like an isolationist, which kind of would go anti-Israel in this case, right? Let's say the libertarian isolationist types. But that's just one topic too. I mean, labor unions going to the right is something that's uncomfortable for parts of that party and just new. And there's these new parties being formed up before our eyes. And it was cool that you went, no matter who you voted for, that you went to the Trump rally to be inside that counterculture. Like as I'm dissecting guests of mine, like maybe that's part of how you get to where you are, is that you're comfortable being in a counterculture there. Does that make sense to you? Is that something you kind of find yourself doing often?
Yeah, like I am a contrarian. Even at the Daily Caller, I was probably the most liberal person at the Caller.
Yeah.
So like I would say things that, they were like, I believe in free speech. And a lot of those people are like, they supported politicians like Ron DeSantis who would do things like punish Walt Disney World or whatever liberal organizations for supporting LGBT stuff or gun rights or whatever. Like they would come out and say, as a company, these are our beliefs. And DeSantis would be like, okay, well, I'm taking away your tax credits because you said something liberal. And they at the Daily Caller were like very much in favor of that. I was like, no, I don't. I think that that's wrong. I'm not afraid to say things that are unpopular if I truly believe those things. I'm not really a go along to get along person to that degree. To some degree, I am, but like I'm also not afraid just to like challenge the prevailing ideology. I'm not afraid to step into environments where I'm a minority, not necessarily just a visible racial minority, but like an ideological minority, which in some cases is harder, right? Because it's one thing to look different, but like if you have certain opinions, people have no problem attacking you and labeling you all types of horrible things, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the progressive, was it the trans rights of a march you went to, the second that you don't have the proper opinions, all of a sudden the racially charged language can come out. And it's yeah.
And you're seeing this right now, actually, after the election, where Trump got record numbers of Latino, especially Latino male, and also Black male votes. And you have a lot of liberals coming out saying things like, well, I hope he deports you. I hope he deports your whole family. I was like, well, whatever happened to like, I'm against deportations. Now it's like Trump's in, so you want them to be deported.
Even did you see the mainstream liberal channels like Morning Joe, CNN? There were people just saying they went to the racist sexism excuse, and they said, who was it? I can't remember who it was exactly, but someone on CNN just goes, we have a problem with black men being racist towards
Joe Scarborough.
Joe Scarborough.
He's on MSNBC.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. It's like, man, what's the holdup for the self-reflection? Like, why can't there be why is that what you have to go to when you see this massive shift? And people just got more racist today. People just got more sexist. It's like, why can't that happen?
I don't want to discredit that race and sex matter in society to some degree, but like, I think that making it all about that and like nothing about else is kind of lazy. I mean, we're in the midst of horrific inflation that has ravaged the entire country. Across the world, incumbent parties are being eviscerated and wiped out of government, basically. America's no exception to that. And I think that when you have a nominee like Kamala Harris, who, she ran her campaign, regardless of what you think of her, like she really didn't draw any actual kind of distinction between herself and Joe Biden. I think she was actually asked on The View by Sunny Hostin, of all people, who's like very, very, very anti-Republican, was very much in the pro-Harris camp. She asked her, was there anything you have done different in these 4 years than Joe Biden? Harris said she couldn't think of anything, right? I think she was asked on another show. It's one of those late night hosts. I think it's Colbert, who asked her, it's basically the same question. Like, it's a change election. How are you going to change things? Are you going to be different than Biden? She couldn't give a coherent answer. And when people are suffering and they're upset and you can't explain to them how things are going to be different, of course they're going to go with Trump, who is, regardless of your opinion, he is a disruptor, right? Like, he's a change agent. You can't really deny that. And so they go with him. And that's true for people of all races, because wherever your opinions are on race issues, the undeniable reality is that all of us are impacted by the economy. All of us, when we go to the grocery store, have paid double for eggs, right? For milk, for cheese, just for basic necessities. Cost of living has gone up. In Democratic governed areas across the country, standard of life has deteriorated because of their lax approach to crime. Kamala Harris had an opening to talk about, her experience as a prosecutor and how she's going to use that to make people safe. She didn't do that. She could have talked about the border. She didn't do that, even though that's probably like the number one or number two issue besides inflation that people are angry about.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
it's, I think it's a mistake to say it's all about identity, but to get more focused on the race thing, it's like, when you have ideas that are not necessarily aligned with what the orthodoxy believes you should have, or they're not necessarily aligned with the broader prevailing liberal orthodoxy, people think that gives them license to attack you and call you all types of horrible things. And, you're ignorant, you're stupid, you're, you don't know what you're talking about, you're uneducated, a bunch of other things that if Republicans said these things to me, they'd be called racist, but I guess like they can say it to me and I guess it's fine. But yeah, like it's a big issue I think Democrats are going to have to figure out, because they've wed themselves to identity issues to a degree that I think has become untenable, especially given the fact that the minorities themselves that they have tried to market themselves towards, those minorities are moving to the opposite side of the political aisle. So it's going to be interesting to see if this coalition on the right can build and become more diverse. And interestingly enough, Trump has actually gotten a smaller share of the white vote in every election he's run. He's gotten less white votes in the 2024 race than the 2020 race, and also to the 2016 race. So the GOP is just diversifying.
That's interesting. I didn't even realize that, which I actually think is a great thing. So my prediction on election day was Trump. I thought it was going to be closer than it was. But I thought Trump was going to win. And I said, here's some positives, no matter who you're rooting for, who you're voting for. Here's some positives I've noticed. And one of the first thing I said was, I think race-based voting is disappearing slowly. I think that's an incredible thing that we're seeing. And in this shift, however it's going to it usually takes, from what I've read, this will be the first one in my lifetime where there's like these big party shakeups. But it usually takes about 3 elections. And we'll have like an identity for these parties for the next few decades, and at least 2 to 3 decades there. And it would be really great to see if, obviously, there's going to be some diversity as far as sex and race and religion and however that all shakes out, but just more of a mix of it, because the identity politics thing, as you've noticed and you've been talking about, it's driven us into untenable places. And at some point, a break was needed. It seems like hopefully Trump is that break. We'll see. We'll see if that does happen or not. But it's been interesting to watch play out, and just I'm fingers crossed, hopeful for the next 4 years here that this is what happens and the world does calm down from an international war perspective. Are you in your capacity at Daily Caller, Algemeiner? No, am I saying that correctly, by the way? Algemeiner?
I've been saying it that way, so I think
okay, great.
I don't know what language it's. Sounds German, so I don't know what. Probably a German word. I don't know how to pronounce it.
It does sound German.
I'm learning German, but that's another side.
How long have you been Algemeiner again?
Since May. May. 5 months, I guess. No, 6 months. 5 to 11, so 6 months. Yeah, about 6 months.
Very cool. I forgot where I was going before that, but I guess at Algemeiner, what else are you writing about? What else is grabbing your interest? What else are you working on outside of just Israel? I know, like right now, you've joined at such a hot topic hot moment in time. But
Mm-hmm.
what else what do you have going on there?
At Algemeiner? Well, I'm technically the Washington correspondent, so I'm supposed to write about just what's happening in DC, and DC and Jewish issues largely revolve around Israel. So it's mainly that Iran, what's happening in Saudi Arabia, what's just general Middle Eastern stuff. Also domestic policies, how Jews are feeling about how they felt about the election. Were we going to see a record number of Jews vote for Trump? The answer to that's kind of mixed, and also regional, right? Like Jews in Pennsylvania went for Trump in a lot larger numbers than before. Yeah. Los Angeles as well, like in the heavily Jewish areas in Beverly Hills, like I think they were majority Trump, right? So it's, in Orthodox Jewish communities as well. They definitely like 90% Trump, 95% Trump, right?
Yeah.
So so I've been writing about that, which is interesting. I write about the Squad a lot, so they're entertaining. I write a lot about Rashid Tlaib and Owen Omar and Summer Lee and Jamal Bowman, Corey Bush, them and the crazy stuff they say. Learning a lot about them. And I think it's interesting because like within the Squad, there's like varying levels of intellect. So you have some that are a little more, I think, cunning and a little more deliberate with how they attack Israel and how they talk about Jewish issues. So AOC, I think, is one of the smarter people within the Squad, and that like she'll say stupid stuff about Israel that are slanderous in my view. But then she'll also, pose with the family of the hostage members, right? So like she kind of muddies the waters a bit. And then you have people like, Jamal Bowman, who will say things like, the October 7th rapes didn't happen, and literally run his campaign promising to not vote for more Iron Dome funding, which is stupid. But like he did that, right? So I always think that's super interesting to write about. I want to get into more investigative work. So I'm actually working on a piece right now where I'm covering this teacher in the Bronx who actually is, she's teaching her students that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. And not in a sort of way where like, okay, well, these are allegations, or informing them about what maybe different international organizations think about this, or asking children to maybe debate, do you think it is or isn't, which is very, a lot of people have issue with that, but I could see like maybe that being an educational experience to debate whether or not Israel is doing those types of things. But no, she's teaching it as if it's an actual fact, right? Like Israel is doing a genocide. And also Israel is settler colonial apartheid.
How old are these students? Are these high schoolers or
7th graders, I think. Yeah, 7th.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah.
It's in New York.
Either way, that seems so inappropriate to me, just for the age. Like, even if you actually believed Israel was committing a genocide, which I could strongly be on the no, that's not happening side, extremely strongly, just obviously in my opinion. But even if you thought it was, and you convinced this is like the worst thing that ever happened, like 12-year-olds, like do you think this is a topic that's appropriate to to bring to that demographic? I don't understand how you get there.
Well, I don't know if you read the Free Press, but they had a really great piece where they basically found that there's like a Teachers for Palestine group where they basically their whole thing is to indoctrinate kindergartners into believing that Israel is a racist, evil, genocidal apartheid state that needs to be dismantled. And they basically are, saying that they want to have anti-Zionist education for 5-year-olds. And why kids need to have this at 5 years old, I don't know. But like my guess is Iran's probably funding it. So I probably should do something and try to figure out where that money is being sourced from, because I'm willing to bet the farm that some Iranian people are probably funding that, and also probably controlling a lot of the discourse that's being had about it, because we know for a fact, based on the allegations that come from our own State Department, that Iran is funding and backing a lot of the campus protests that we have in part of an effort to kind of destabilize Western countries. So, yeah, I mean, I think that I want to do more investigative work, and that's kind of the type of stuff that I'm working on my end. I'm also writing a piece about the incoming Trump team, the transition team, and the expectations that we actually can have about, Israel policy in the new Trump administration. The Trump administration has a lot of really interesting people in it, but the rumored head of the transition team for the State Department, he essentially was saying that he believes that the administration will go back towards a full pressure strategy against Iran to isolate Iran, make Iran poor, take their money, basically just punish them really hard to stop them from being able to fund terrorist groups, which in my professional opinion, my capacity as a journalist, from what I have read, that seems to be the most effective strategy. So yeah, I'm working on things like that, which I think I'm excited about, because I like working on things that are super fun and compelling and interesting, and yeah, and also like college campus stuff, which is not my beat. We have another reporter there named Dion Pierre who writes about college campus stuff, but I'm super interested in that because I just think that those kids are crazy. I just find it interesting to write about what's happening at Columbia University and Harvard and these places where, kids are getting a $70,000 education and they're going to the most prestigious schools in the country, but they, have these strikes, performative strikes, where they pretend like anyone cares what they think when we don't. We really just don't,
Yeah.
But that's kind of
Well,
where I'm
there's an
at.
elitism. Very cool. The investigative work is super cool, and I'm very excited to see that work. That's going to be awesome. And you're in a great field within the field to do that work. But as far as the college campuses go, there is an elitism there. That I've noticed actually since I was 15, and I've actually just kind of railed against it since I was a kid like that. It is crazy that so when I was 15, I went to summer camp, Jewish summer camp. The first time I met Jews in my life.
Really?
I had met Jews kind of here and there.
Where are you from?
But yeah, I'm from Kansas.
Okay.
I'm wearing a button down that's got a Jayhawk on it. And the Jayhawks were the story behind the Jayhawks are very cool. How we got that name and everything. They're freedom fighters because we were a free state and Missouri was a slave state, and there's a whole rivalry there. Some guys from Missouri came and burnt down Lawrence, Kansas, where the school is. They burnt the town down, and then this dad, I can't remember how many, he had a lot of sons, 8 sons, went to Columbia, Missouri, or Columbus, Missouri, whatever, Missouri University, and they massacred people. And it was like a rival. It was a true rivalry between these two campuses. Long time ago, ended up being called the Jayhawks, freedom fighters, whole story there. But anyway, I grew up in Kansas, and I didn't know any Jews growing up, so I went to camp when I was 15 for the first time. Met Jewish people. I have friends to this day. Some of my best friends to this day, actually, I met there. But I noticed at that time, all of the counselors went to different schools, and they had this huge rivalry just based on the schools. We noticed it in the counselors, and we would grow up and we became the counselors. I went there for a year as a camper, and I worked there for a couple as a staff guy. And there was an elitist problem. I noticed it immediately. There's an elitist problem where it didn't even have to be these super great schools, but just kind of the best schools that people were going to. You come back from one year there, summertime, going into your sophomore year, whatever it is, and you see it and notice it immediately that there's this sense of we are better than, we are the future, we are we're everything, we're the ones that are going to lead the way, and you should listen to us, and it really takes people over. It's almost a mind virus in its own sense. I went to Kansas. I love my school. I'm proud of my school. I did a great program in the MAC program, Masters of Accounting. Fantastic program. Put it up against anybody's, but I didn't have that sense. I went to Kansas. I went to a basketball school, and it was very interesting to see play out. And then you fast forward to IsraelPalestine, October 7th attacks, and all of a sudden, they're just so convinced of the morally correct group, and everyone is. It's the whole thing is just crazy, and but I'm telling you, as you said, they think we care. They truly think everyone's looking to them, and everyone's looking. It's crazy. Yeah, sorry.
No, go for it. So yeah, someone did a really great analysis where they actually mapped all of the campuses where the encampments were happening, and they put it like on like an XY kind of like what x-axis
Mm-hmm.
y-axis kind of graph where they mapped basically organized them by tuition costs. And basically all these schools cost like $60,000-$70,000 a year in tuition. And so
Yeah.
you're talking about Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Barnard, MIT, University of Pennsylvania, the most elitist schools in the country where these encampments are happening. You're not going to find these encampments at Arizona State or the University of Mississippi. You're not going to find them at the University of Kentucky, or even
Yeah.
HBCUs. I remember I read an article in the New York Times where they were like, why are HBCUs not getting involved in the pro-Palestine protest movement and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, these are like mostly working class Black kids who, they're
Yeah.
not interested in virtue signaling. They actually have to go to school, right? A lot of these kids are taking out loans. They're not using daddy's credit card to, go out to dinner with their friends every Friday night, right? Like, so in many ways, like I said, it's status, it's popularity. A lot of people I think are trying to be popular. And one thing that's interesting that's been commented on a couple of times, but not enough in my opinion, is that it's overwhelmingly female. Like it's mostly girls in these protests, encampments and stuff. You're not going to find a lot of, it has to be 70-80% female. So I
Interesting.
think, yeah, so you're not going to find many men in these encampments. So yeah, it's a really fascinating phenomenon in which you see students, lashing out and virtue signaling about a conflict that I don't think many of them care about. It's like how these kids say, oh, I'm a socialist, I'm a communist, I, tear down the system. And then, 1 year out from graduation, they're working at Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. Like it's all fake. It's literally all just fake, which is why I'm actually refreshed, despite how sickening, in my view, these colleges have handled the anti-Semitic pro-terrorist protests. That's how I describe it.
Yeah.
Because that's what they are. They are pro-terrorist protests. Like they explicitly say we
Many of
support
them. Many of
Hamas,
them.
Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Like they explicitly say we support Hamas, Hezbollah. These are freedom fighters, right? October 7th was justified. So they're pro-terrorism protests. And basically, like the way that I think of it is, like I said, these are people who are just virtue signaling and trying to, come across as, I really don't know. Like I said, like these are people who are just, it's like the new BLM thing, right? From 2020, we had BLM, and a bunch of people wanted to hop on board to that. And those same people have found basically a new cause to make themselves feel enlightened or whatever. So yeah, that's basically how I view it.
No, yeah, that makes sense. All right, I have had you for about an hour, so I'm gonna ask you a few more questions and I can give
Yeah.
you your rest of your day back. As far as getting the journalism, do you have any advice on kind of from your journey, your path that you would give somebody that wants to get into the field and kind of follow the career steps that you've taken?
Yeah. So I would say that be careful because media is actually in a very precarious position right now. Lots of places are laying off. I was a victim of a layoff, so I know that personally. It sucks. I would say that don't get a journalism degree, which is a mistake that a lot of people made. I almost made that mistake, so I'm glad I didn't. Journalism is a trade, so don't go to college for it at least. Write for your local school newspaper, write for other publications. A really great outlet, if you're more conservative leaning, is actually Campus Reform, and they actually pay you $75 per article. So it's a good
Oh,
way to
wow.
make some money while you're in school, which is nice. So I would recommend that. I would recommend within journalism, you want to find a beat and you kind of want to add value. So re-reporting things other people have reported and just basically aggregating stuff is just, it's kind of boring, and also you'll just be disposable. So one of my I don't want to call him a mentor, but he's someone who I'm friendly with and who I really admire is actually Aaron Sibarium. He writes for the Washington Free Beacon, and he basically exposes really colleges and all the crazy stuff they're going on there and their DI initiatives. And so I think doing things like that, where you are like bringing something to the table that's fresh and new in regards to, not just writing about your viewpoints, your opinions, or op-eds, but saying, okay, Harvard University is funding a pro-Palestine retreat within, they're going over to Israel and they're doing a retreat that's a pro-Palestine retreat, and it's tied to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist group or something like that. Like, he would do stuff like that, and I think that's interesting, and it brings a whole new flavor. He also was doing stuff where he was exposing, like, for example, Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard. He exposed her anti-Semitism, not her anti-. Well, yeah, well, that too, but he exposed her plagiarism, and that helped get her fired, right? So.
Yeah.
I think things like that. I think try to find something fresh, unique, different to help you stand out within the crowd. And I think for me, that's kind of like what I'm trying to do now, right? I'm trying to add something new to the table, which I would recommend any young aspiring journalist to do. Keep writing, keep reading. I would say, like, never work for free, which is, I mean, if you're in college, you can do it, but actually you don't have to, because like I said, you can write for the, Campus Reform and other outlets. The College Fix, which is also wrote for, they pay $75 an article too. So, like, I would say, like, don't allow yourself to be exploited, because so many places will try to exploit you and make you work for free. Don't do that. And that's kind of it. I would say that, like, try to become like your own brand, in a sense, where, like, you have a Twitter following, you have maybe you have a Substack, right? Like, try to have things of your own that are not necessarily tied to a
brand or a company.
Tied to a outlet, because like I said, you can always get fired from your outlet. So try to have something that you're really good at, that you're known for, and have like a niche. Right now, I'm kind of carving myself a niche, not intentionally, but like unintentionally, as being someone who, I guess, is like trying to be more of a defender of Israel and add more more nuance to the pro-Israel-Palestine conflict. And I think maybe since I'm not Jewish and I'm a person of color, I'm Black, that might add a new element to it that, may give me some sort of, it shouldn't give me more credibility, but like maybe it does in the eyes of other people.
I mean, it's a weird thing there on that. Like, it does give you credibility, which is so weird, because I'm one of these people that I'm a fan of Coleman Hughes, and we should live in a colorblind society. That TED Talk in particular actually is one of the things that really gravitated me towards him. And I think our parents got that part right, and like we should try and live in a colorblind society. But at the same time, I can't ignore, especially within this topic that we're talking about, that your identity just lends credibility one way or the other. So John Aziz is a voice that I like a lot on Twitter. He's written a couple articles. His first was for I think they were both for the Atlantic now. He's not a journalist by any means. He was just a Palestinian guy that just said he kind of had this viral tweet moment where, yes, pro-peace activist. He had a viral tweet that was like, why do I feel so alone as a Palestinian? Like, I just want peace. I want it alongside Israel. I want to stay. And that blew up. And, as if he was Jewish, that doesn't blow up, right? That doesn't get you a following. So, unfortunately, with you a following when you're Jewish is being more so like a Norman Finkelstein, who, parents him with the Holocaust, and he's just, Israel shouldn't exist, and he supports the Houthis and Hamas and everything like that. So it gets you that following. So it's unfortunate, but it is something coming from your background, like. It does lend credibility, because you truly are able to have a unbiased, we all have a bias, but a more or less unbiased opinion. And I think this is something that crosses every spectrum, unfortunately. It's something that I'd like to ignore, but we can't, if that all makes sense.
What'd you say?
So that's something that I'd like to ignore, but we just can't. If that makes sense.
I mean, I think that in an ideal world, your identity would not carry as much weight in these discussions, but I think realistically it just does. I actually was watching, I forget the name of the podcast. I would love to shout them out, but like, it was a discussion between about Israel was some Sephardic Jews having this discussion with someone who's like Ashkenazi, and he was like, we should, like, Sephardic Jews and Mizrahim Jews should become like the face of Zionism, because it kind of takes away that kind of weapon from the left that they can say, oh, you're just a bunch of white colonizers. If you have a bunch of like brown or darker skinned people making the case for Israel. But then the other guy was like, the host was like, yeah, but I don't want to do the whole like racial identity politics thing just because they're doing it. But at the same time, they realize that like wielding that is a very, powerful weapon, right? Like,
Yeah.
identity is powerful, right? You can wish it wasn't, but it was.
Yeah.
Where I differ from Coleman Hughes is that I operate more in reality. Like, I'm not an idealist when it comes to these sorts of identity issues. Like, I just, the world we live in, it is, the world we live in is the world we live in. Like, identity does matter, right? It just does. So, like, I don't ignore that. I try to leverage that to my advantage when I can. I don't try to leverage it against people. I never weaponize my identity against people. I don't weaponize people's identity against themselves, but I also just understand that because of how I look in my personal background, that's going to give me elevate my voice. But if I can use that, even if it's wrong, even if I can use it to advance what in my view are like morally good things, I probably should do that, right? The other side is not hesitating to do that.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting game. And if you have something you believe in that you think is right, and the other side can say this too. People that believe in the worst things, that think they're righteous, could say this too. But
yeah,
there all is a line there. It's a foggy, thin line of what's too far, what's right, what's wrong. But
yeah,
it makes
I
sense.
do think that what's interesting is that for all the talk we've had over the past year, the breathless media coverage in Israel-Palestine, I actually wrote an article on Algemeiner, which a poll from Blueprint, which is like a Democratic-aligned data analytics firm, found that Israel-Palestine was literally a bottom 3 issue for all groups in the election, right? No one cared. In fact, they actually asked, like, is Harris being too pro-Israel kind of like a deal breaker for you? It was a bottom 3 issue for all groups. I think for Black Americans, it was like the least important thing of all issues. It was like the least important. It was a bottom 3 for everyone. In fact, Harris being too pro-Palestine ranked higher than being too pro-Israel as an issue that people would hold against her. So like her taking the more pro-Palestine side would have hurt her more. But both of those issues ranked low out of all of the issues that they listed. It was literally just the economy, inflation, the border crisis, and the perception that Harris cares a lot about culture war issues like trans stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Israel-Palestine stuff is just like, it's not that salient with the public. But it's not surprising. It's like the people who care about it are all people who have like master's degrees and stuff. Like, it's not really a real, so that's kind of like my view. But I do think, I do have a belief that, Jewish people should have a state, and that, there should be a state within the Middle East for Jewish people. I think Israel has done a good job. They're a first world thriving nation that treats its own citizens pretty justly. I don't live there, of course, but like, I don't think they have the human rights concerns that their neighbors have. So yeah, I think that they need to obviously figure out a way to work out a peaceful negotiation. I guess to pivot back to the earlier discussion about with Trump coming in, I mean, there's rumblings that David Friedman is going to follow him. And David Friedman was kind of the architect of his first administration's Israel-Palestine policies. In that administration, they actually did, obviously, the Abraham Accords, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Friedman wants to push them to annex the West Bank. So that's interesting. I don't know how that's going to work. I know that that's a very controversial view, even within Israel.
Oh, yeah.
But I do think that might be an indication of where we may be headed. Some form of West Bank annexation. I don't know how that works out in the end, but like I do think that you have to work toward. I think Israel has to win. They have to figure out a way to win. And I don't know if, quite frankly, a Palestinian state is tenable as of now. I would love to see that happen, but as of right now, where it's literally both sides are run by terrorist organizations, the West Bank and Gaza, and and the clock is kind of ticking on Israel because international sentiment is shifting. Younger people are so anti-Israel, right? And those people are going to come to power, and they're going to start weaponizing their power against Israel. And at that point, if the whole international community is against Israel, then what leverage does Israel have against, the Palestinians? Like none. So they have to move, I think, within the next decade to actually decisively win the conflict. And if that can't be a two-state solution, it may have to be something as radical as a West Bank annexation in order to secure Israel's long-term safety. Now, what you do with the Palestinians living there, I do not know, right? I mean, voting rights for Palestinians in West Bank is incredibly controversial, but they have to work out something. And quite frankly, it probably has to be really soon, just given the international sentiment about Israel and how that's shifting.
Yeah, I know that. 1 hour in, but now I really want to keep. How long can I keep you here?
As long as you want. I'm not I don't have anything to do with Sunday.
Great. I would love to talk about that because as far as adding value goes, as you were talking about before, it's great advice, by the way. This is something that hasn't been talked about because it is just so touchy, but this is something I think is needed to talk about. Like, what's the end goal here? Because when I enter this discourse, when everyone enters this discourse, I mean, even just like reading, before even saying anything online, I'm just trying to learn about it more. I think everyone's kind of like, for the most part, I want a two-state solution. I want everyone to be free and have liberty and all these great things. And that's kind of what we're trying to figure out how to do. And as you kind of get into it, you realize, okay, well, the Palestine, as far as the elites go that control everything, the Palestinian plan has always been never surrender. And this is something that when you see on debates and podcasts and discussions is, the proud, especially the pro-Palestinian supporters, they're very proud they've never surrendered. And eventually, the kind of Israelis are kind of like the Crusaders. They'll go away. The Crusaders here for 200 years. It's only been 80. It hasn't even been 80 years. Israel will go away within time. We just can't surrender in the meantime. And Israel's been trying to find a way to like, okay, how can we survive now and in the long term? As you were saying, it's kind of right now, it gets a little dicey where it's okay. So Hamas is going to be driven out of power in Gaza, unable to carry out another October 7th type event at least. Hezbollah, let's assume, will get driven back past the UN resolution line that they're supposed to be passed. And I think at that point, it is really, what do you do if you're Israel? Because as you said, these kids will come to power. They're my age. Everyone's my age, unless they're kids. But these 20-somethings will come to power. But it's going to be a while, 20 to 30 years. And when you're Israel, you kind of really are thinking like, well, okay, I want regime change in Iran. I want regime change. I want Hezbollah out of the politics of Lebanon. I want actual Lebanon to be Lebanon again. And you're thinking about all these types of things that have to happen. And then you get to the West Bank. I think that's the big one, is really, what do you do with the West Bank and the population there, combined with the population of Gaza of, okay, well, if you give them voting rights, they're going to vote Israel out of existence as a Jewish state. And we'll have a civil war. That seems pretty obvious. The approval rating on October 7th last year for Israel and the USA in Palestine was 0%. Hard to get lower than that. And it seems very obvious to me. So I'm curious about, like, do you have any thoughts? And if you want to just kind of stick to the report, or here's what I think's going to happen, or here's what's kind of happening, but I also want to know your own thoughts. Like, how does this go? Like, what's next here?
I mean, Friedman's argument is that they should not give Palestinians voting rights. Now, my view is that, if you're gonna basically, control entire populations of people, they should be able to participate in democracy. Then at a certain point, it gets hard to call yourself a democracy if like 40% of the population can't vote. Yeah. And so then Israel has to grapple with, do you want to deal with international condemnation that comes with not giving Palestinians voting rights, right? Because there'll be a lot of that. Mm-hmm. But then the other end of that is like, are there other alternatives? I think, one thing is like, maybe you could just mandate that leadership has to be Jewish, right? And the leader of the military has to be Jewish. And I think that they could do that. I mean, Middle Eastern countries mandate that the leader of their country is Muslim, right? That's what Islamic states do. You can't go to an Islamic state as a Christian and run those countries, right? You can't run Egypt as a non-Muslim. Same with Lebanon, where there's actually a mandate that you have to be Christian to rule Lebanon. And they are not a nation that has even a Christian majority at this point. I think Lebanon's only about 40% Christian.
Yep.
So I think Israel could start looking at things like that, where like, okay, well, everyone can vote, but at the same time, this is a Jewish state, so leadership is going to be Jewish, military leadership is going to be Jewish, and that's to protect our own safety. But still, everyone gets to participate, like in the democracy and stuff like that. I think things like that might work. You have to run the risk of also internal terrorism. If you have millions of radicalized people in your borders that hate the country, believes it should be an Islamic country, So that's another thing. I think particularly with Gaza, they may be better off if they can cut a deal with like Saudi Arabia or something, or the UAE, kind of like take it over and turn it into a protectorate. I think they need to go through, quite frankly, a whole multi-generational project of kind of like de-radicalism, where they stop teaching them to hate Jews, and stop raising them to pursue terroristic activities. And that's no fault of their own. They were raised there. Like, you can't control where you're born or what ideology you're raised. So I have 100% sympathy for them. That is not their fault. But at the same time, it makes complete sense that a Jewish country would not want millions of radicalized anti-Semites in their border. Just like in America, we don't allow millions of people. Actually, in the Biden administration, we allowed a lot. But ideally, we would not allow millions of people across our border, especially if those people hated America and wanted to kill us for being Americans. We would not want them. We would not let them in our country. We just wouldn't, right? It's not hard. Same thing with Israel. Like, they're not going to allow millions of radicalized anti-Semites in their border. And they shouldn't, in my view. My professional opinion, I guess. But I do also think that, there's just the reality that Israel has to contend with. You're a democracy. You fashion yourself kind of as a democracy the same way Western countries do. And where are the limits of that? And quite frankly, should Israel do that anymore, right? Like, should Israel view itself in the model of Western countries? It's a Middle Eastern country. So maybe they should start viewing themselves as like a hybrid of the two and having values in...
I think a lot of the citizens there do view it that way, to be honest.
As a Middle Eastern country? Or a Western?
I think they view it as a hybrid. I think they view themselves as Israelis. So there was a saying, oh man, who said it? Really lacking the names today, but there was a Russian diplomat. I was asked a question, so are you guys Asian or European? And he replied, we're Russian. And that, from what I've gathered when I talk to Israelis and when I go to Israel and talk to people there, it's very much like, yeah, we're sort of Middle Eastern, we're sort of, Western, but really we're just Israeli. And even within that, there are arguments of, what Israeli means and what that, all those things. Like, if you talk to a Druze person versus even a Bedouin, or a Thai immigrant, or an Orthodox Jew versus a secular Jew, they're like Palestinian, Arab, Israeli, like everyone kind of has their own views there, but I think they all kind of view themselves as this unique entity. And I think it's growing harder not to view themselves that way. When you go to a football game in Amsterdam and you have a bunch of drunk racist idiots yelling stuff, and at this point I think it was proven it was planned, but in response, it was pre-planned to even the drunken idiots, but in response there's now videos of people running over Jews and stabbing Jews and beating people for helping a Jew, as they even said on there, and calling it a Jew hunt. Like, I don't know how you see yourself as anything but Israel. Yeah, we're not Western. This wouldn't happen to a Western country. This wouldn't happen to a Middle Eastern country. This is just Israel.
Well, part of that is that they've basically imported a lot of Muslim migrants from the Middle East who, well, there's nothing
You're talking
wrong with
about
that.
you're
It's
talking about
just
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's nothing wrong with that per se, based on their faith, their ethnicity, of course, but it's an issue when you import people without integrating them, and they carry the same racial, religious grievances that they had in their home countries. And that's kind
Yeah.
of what we're seeing. That's what we're witnessing in Amsterdam and also throughout Europe and Canada as well. We don't have as much of that here because we're only 1% Muslim compared to being like 7 or 8% Muslim, like the
Yeah.
UK, right? So I think that that's one of the things where like the West is becoming more and more Islamic because they're bringing in lots of people from the Islamic world, and those people from the Islamic world aren't just dropping their values. Their values are the same.
Yeah.
So
I don't know the answer for that one either. That one does scare me.
yeah,
Because the numbers aren't. I mean, America's a big place. It's not like the numbers are super high in the UK. Like you said, 7 to 8%.
right.
And it's completely altered the culture there in parts of the country. I haven't had as many conversations with British folk, but when I've talked to a couple of them, they'll tell you like, yeah, there's this town in the southeast or southwest, whatever it is, that it's completely unrecognizable. It's just not the same culture. It's not the same. It doesn't look like Britain, and that is kind of, given what's happening in Europe now, that does scare me a lot, and what might happen in Europe, and is there even a future there for Jews, and could that happen in America? I don't think it can. I don't think it would, but yeah, no, it is. It's a lot going on over there. It's very scary.
I think that's something you have to safeguard against, and not be kind of like lackadaisical about it. I think that you have to acknowledge that it could happen here, right? But it's something that you have to be actively aware of. And, it's like I said, we need to be careful if we allow to immigrate into the country.
Yeah.
If we had a Kamala Harris administration, probably lots of migrants from Gaza. With Trump, probably not, right? So
Probably
like
not.
that's part of it. I think migration policy, while I don't believe in discriminating against people based on where they're from or what their religion is, I think that's wrong. I do think that ideological discrimination is perfectly fine. Like, we don't want people in our country who are anti-Western civilization, who hate Israel and who hate America. We just shouldn't allow that. And if you believe that, go to countries that already have those views. Like, we shouldn't, we have to defend our own civilization. Because if we don't, why would no one else will? Like, it's almost like a Trojan horse, right? Like, you're bringing in people into the country that want to destroy your country and also its allies. And, I think that we need people who want to help America and want to help our allies, which Israel is one of them. And so that's my view. I think immigration is important. I think that how we teach things are important. I think the sort of like I've been hitting on a lot today about the anti-Western sentiment, and also just like this whole idea of like settler colonialism, which we apply to our own country, right? Like I read an article about the Smithsonian, where in the Smithsonian they describe America, the settling of America, as settler colonialism, and say that our expansion into the West was just a project of settler colonialism. And although technically that could be true, quote unquote, it's emblematic of a sort of like hatred or negative framing that we have towards America and also countries that are aligned with America.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's problematic because as flawed as America is, right? And I'm Black, so like my family dealt with the actual flaws America had. We actually had to deal with we paid the price for that, to say the least. But as flawed as our country is, it's also a great country, right? We are a country that has made rapid progress, a country that gives great opportunity to people from around the world of all race, creeds, religions, that you can come here, regardless of who you are, what you look like, and be successful and do well. We're not perfect, but we are good. Like, we are a good country. And I think that the kind of rot that we see in academia and in our institutions is kind of in symbiosis. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but it's kind of like connected to this radical Islamist extremism that they're kind of, in many ways, importing Islamist ideology into the progressive movement. And they are teaming up, Islamists and leftists are teaming up to destroy Israel and also destroy America, right? By proxy, at least.
Yeah, no,
And I
I
think
agree.
I think that's extremely it's an issue, you know. I think that's kind of like how I view that's how I view that. I think that we need to be very careful with who we allow to immigrate into this country. Trump had a Muslim ban. At least say he tried to have one his first term. I'm not saying I support that. What I am saying I do support is being very skeptical with who we allow, because we don't want extremists coming into our country that want to undermine our nation. Because if you do that for 20 years, you know, like we won't have a country at that point.
Yeah, no, it can't happen that fast. I mean, we're a large country, so
Yeah,
at the pace, who knows? But we have seen that in other countries. It happens quickly. Lebanon's a good
it's
example
happening
of,
right now. Well, yeah,
yeah,
it's happening in Lebanon. It's happening in
yeah.
Iraq. You know,
I think Egypt's a good example as well
yeah,
of Egypt. It was a Christian country. They were Coptic Christians, and they were one of the
yeah,
original Christians. And
yeah.
now you have to be Muslim to run the country. And
Well,
it's
that's why I said
yeah,
I said that if you want to know why Israeli Jews feel the way they do and why they're so paranoid, look at what happened to Coptic Christians. Look what happened to Christians in Iraq. Look at what's happened to Druze. Look at what happened to Kurds. Right? Like
yeah,
look at what happens to every minority group within the Middle East. Right? They are oppressed. They become
yeah,
oppressed, and
yeah,
they
absolutely.
are and they are marginalized, and they are hunted down, and they are either genocided or they're forcibly converted, which you can argue is a form of genocide because at least it's cultural genocide, right?
Yeah,
Um, it's and when you have countries like Iran and other groups like the Houthis saying that their goal is literally to massacre Jews in mass and turn Israel into a Islamic caliphate, you can understand why Israelis feel the way they do, right? Because they know what
yeah,
happens if they lose. They know what happens if they lose, which is
absolutely.
they are going to be exterminated, just like other groups have been exterminated, by Islamist entities within the Middle East. So, I think that their concerns are valid, and I think in America we should not look at this through a Western lens. We have to be understanding enough to kind of look at this through a Middle Eastern lens. I understand this is a Middle Eastern conflict, and it has to be handled the way Middle Eastern conflicts are handled, not the way that we would handle it. Which is why I understand why Israel's fighting their war, and I want them to win the war decisively, not halfway win it. I want them to win it, because if they don't, then that's a huge propaganda win for the Islamist parties within the Middle East, which is bad for Israel, but also bad for America. Because I do think Israel helps America. We talk a lot about how we help Israel in regard to giving Israel funding or whatever. That's true to a degree, but they also help us. Like they've upgraded a lot of our military stuff. They do intelligence work for us in the Middle East. So like it's a mutually
And
beneficial partnership.
the relationship there is fantastic because we have the first grab. I think we have this for much of the world, but we were the first grab at Israeli entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
The largest private acquisition ever made was Google. When they who was it? Let's see. Google purchased new security. It was a security. Oh gosh, no, I'm just disrupting the flow of the conversation because I wanted to find it. Um, Screw it. It doesn't matter. They purchased a cybersecurity company, and it was from Israel. It's the largest purchase ever. It's for former IDF soldiers, and this is something that's going to help America and help Americans stay safe. Cybersecurity, right? And all of that technology, there was a book called The Startup Nation, and all of that, the first place they go is America. And I think that alone is like a super valuable thing. And as you said, the technology sharing, the military sharings, the informational sharings from spy agencies, all of that is just it's something that America gets back. It's not this one-way relationship, but it's very much framed as that a lot of the time.
Yeah, Israel has the most, I think, startup dollars per capita, I think, outside of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So like it's a very productive country and technology, not just defense technology, but consumer technologies. And I think that, listen, Israel is successful. And I think that that's why you see the Gulf states wanting to partner with Israel, right?
Yeah.
Because they're moving away from terrorism, quite frankly. And they're like, okay, well, we want tourism. We want to be ingrained with the Western. We want to be integrated with the Western economies. We want to make money, and so they're partnering with Israel to help deter Iran and Iran's threat that they pose. They're turning to Israel for desalinization technologies, right?
Yeah.
So I think Israel is, if they can get past this sort of Islamist eliminationist ideology, there's a bright future for the Middle East in which Israel is in partnership with the Gulf states. And I think that they can do great things together. And I think that that is beneficial for the world. And if Israel were to fall and Jerusalem and the country would become quote unquote Palestine, it will literally just be an Iranian client state. Iran doesn't care about Palestinians. Like Iran probably wants control over Jerusalem, because that gives them something to kind of rival. It gives them opportunity to rival Saudi Arabia for domination within the Middle East. Because remember, Saudi Arabia has Mecca, right? Hajj goes through Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is kind of like the cultural giant within the Islamic world, right? It's Saudi Arabia. If Iran wants to challenge that, they need to get a quote unquote Mecca of their own, and that can be Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so turning Israel into an Islamic state that's literally just an Iranian puppet state elevates Iran's standing within, the Middle Eastern, the Islamic world. And so, yeah, that's kind of, I think, what this is about, and that's why I say I care about Palestinians. I do. But the Middle Eastern countries certainly do not. And American leftists also don't. American leftists openly cheer on not only the terrorist groups here, but they cheer, like, for example, they'll say Bashar al-Assad was justified in gassing his own people, or they'll deny it ever happened. They support Russia over Ukraine. They don't care about Muslims in China and what China is doing to Uyghur Muslims. If anything, they say, well, it's not happening. Like I've seen to my own face.
The UN refused to even take a vote on that subject.
Exactly. Same with Hong Kong. I've seen leftists argue that China should retake over Taiwan, that Taiwan belongs to China. So these are not people who care about, marginalized or oppressed people. They view Israel as basically a Western state, and they want to destroy it because they view it as Western. And that's really all this comes down to. Like that's what this is about to me.
Yeah, no, depending on which demographic you're coming from, but yeah, the leftist one, yeah, for sure. I think that's exactly what I think this is about. And I think if Israel fell, it would make for a fantastic television show of what would happen next, because I think you just have all of these different bidders trying to take over Jerusalem, all these different powers just going after that city. That, because like you said, it's a symbol of legitimacy. It's a symbol of it's a new Mecca.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Go.
I also just think that look, that would be Israel has nuclear weapons for a reason. Like, if Israel were to fall, that's not going to be looking good for Iran, because there'll be a big, nuclear crater in Tehran, right? Like, it's not, like I just don't think Israel's going anywhere, right? Like when you have a country that has like hundreds of nuclear warheads, like those are there for a reason, right? Like it's the last case scenario, but they're not afraid to use them. So a lot of this to me is just like, you guys have to work it out and, figure it out a pathway forward. And I just think that I don't have all the answers, but I think Israel needs to go on the offense. And without revealing my own, I guess you can probably figure out what my politics are by listening to this. But what I do think a bright spot, maybe the next Trump administration is going to be, is that they're going to allow Israel to play to win, not just play to stalemate, right?
Yeah.
Play to win. And so you can kind of chart for a pathway towards a future that is in favor of Israel. And because if Israel is in a good place, I think that stabilizes the Middle East. I think if Israel is in a good place, that's obviously great for the global Jewish diaspora. But it's also good for the world. I think Israel contributes a lot to the world, like technologies, medicine, sciences. But they also benefit the United States. So, I think people don't understand how hard state building is and what a miracle Israel actually is. Like
I agree.
the vast majority of states fail. Look at post-colonial Africa, right? Like look at most of the states after colonization, they are overwhelming failures. In many cases, those states, in terms of their internal economies and the humanitarian treatment of their civilians, may actually be worse than they were under the rule of the British or the French or whatever. I'm not saying that was good. It was terrible. I'm not defending it. But it's not like what came after was great either. So I say, like, if you are anti-Israel, think of the consequences that come after. It's probably not going to be good, especially if it's run by Iran or its proxies. Probably really, really bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I say absolutely, but to me, it's common sense. Like to me, it's everything you're saying is just common sense. And it doesn't really matter what party you're on, because like I'm a centrist, and I have 1,000 reservations about Trump. In fact, one of my old episodes, I was talking to a guy. His podcast is called "Searching for Political Identity." He ended up being a Trump guy, and he's got this huge following now because he took this path to Trump. And I argued against Trump the whole time I was talking to him. And the one thing I wouldn't argue against, actually, is like, well, I think for the Middle East he'll be good, and especially for Israel he'll be good. But the whole point being is that it doesn't really matter what side of politics you're on here. You could be right, left, center, and this all it just seems like common sense to me. Like a strong Israel, and Israel that survives and is successful, is good for the Middle East. It's good for America. It's good for the world. And it's just about getting people to be able to sit down and even open their mind to that possibility, which is one of the things that you are helping to do. And I'm very excited to see your investigative work and everything that you do further on in your career as we stay in touch and as I follow your journey. And on that note, what do you have other than that investigative work? What do you have coming up in like the next 6 months, next year?
Scary question. I'm studying for my GMAT, so like I may be going to business school. Cool. So that's something that I have coming up on a personal level. I definitely want to work on more projects. I want to work on a Substack. I'm not sure what's going to be. Maybe Israel, because that's kind of like my beat at this point. So maybe something Israel related. Maybe the intersection between American and Israeli politics, and the intersection between how the left views Israel and how the left treats Israel. How kind of this sort of intersection between Westernized identity politics and Israel has taken hold. I really like, I don't know if you follow on Twitter, Ella Kalaban.
Yes, I have.
She's Iranian, but she writes about the Islamist influence in the Middle East and how that's impacting how Americans view Israel. And so I really admire her, and I kind of want to do stuff like that. But I also, like I said, I'm an investigative journalist now. So I may start doing a lot more investigating into this so-called, I would call it the Islamist takeover of our institutions. So look out for that. That's basically what I'm going to be doing, and I'm excited to kind of write about that. That's going to be a lot of fun. And I also want to do more stuff with the Trump administration. I Sorry, my throat's getting worse. Since I write for the Algemeiner, I'm a Washington correspondent, I'm going to get a lot of access to DC when Trump comes in. So I look forward to kind of like getting in there and, talking to those folks and grilling those people, because that's going to be fun. Regardless of what you think of Trump, he's entertaining. So it's going to be entertaining 4 years.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's going to shake out, but I'm excited to see how it turns out.
Yeah, I'm excited to follow your work. Also excited to see how the next 4 years turns out, because it could go a lot of ways. But it's been great talking to you. I'm excited to, again, follow you and have you back on in a year or two and hear what's been happening. And thank you so much for making the time today. I know that your throat's starting to hurt, so I can let you go and give your day back.
Oh, no, yeah. And anytime. You don't have to wait a whole year if you don't want. If you want me back on in a few months, I'm more than happy. But whenever.
That'd be great.
Yeah, but like, yeah, I'm always happy to talk and do these shows, and it's great.
Awesome. That'd be great. I appreciate that. In that case, we'll see you here in a few months. I have a few projects cooking up myself, so hopefully I can have you on some other things as well, but we'll see. Anyway, okay. Corey, thank you so much for coming on, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.